All right, I'm letting them in. Here we go. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. If you could just go ahead and mute yourself as you're joining, that'd be awesome. We'll get started here in a sec.
Hey, give me a second. I have to let my dog out. He is whining at me.
Go for it, Colin. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Just giving everyone a sec to get connected.
All right.
All right. Well, I guess we'll get started then. All right, everything's in place. Thank you all for coming. It's so nice to see some fun faces. So welcome to WICCourse, Urban versus Rural Water Insecure Communities, a Shared Struggle. WICCourse is an educational panel series by the Water Insecurity Correction Coalition to advocate for and raise awareness of the water insecurity issues facing Americans across the country. This is our third ever WICCourse. This is Jackson, our advocate's second ever WICCourse, and this is Colin's first. We're super excited to have you all here. Just some background on our organization. Water Insecurity Correction Coalition, or WICC as we like to call it, is a youth-based 501c3 nonprofit. We're based in upstate New York, but all of our team members are from all over. We work to advocate for and work with water insecure communities to ensure equitable access to clean water for people across the US. We focus on 5 key action areas to fight for water security for all Americans, which include fundraising development, grassroots activism, legislative advocacy, youth empowerment, and meaningful education. Like I said, we're so excited to have you all here. We have a really interesting presentation for you all today. So I will pass it off to our advocacy director, Nolan Lyons, to tell you all a bit about why we're here today. So Nolan, take it away.
Hi everyone, I'm Nolan. I'm the advocacy director. So yeah, this is our WICCourse event on water insecurity, a shared struggle between rural and urban communities. So Jackson and Colin have worked throughout like the past semester, last couple of months on this. They've done a lot of research. They've met with legislators from these communities, from New York and Kentucky, and they put a lot of work into this. And they have like a really comprehensive understanding of these issues and what it's going to take to fix these issues. So we're really excited to see what they have put together for us. So without further ado, this is Rural versus Urban Water Insecurity, a Shared Struggle by Jackson McGough and Colin O'Connor.
Hey everybody, I'm Jackson McGough. I'm an advocate with WICC, and I'll be talking about Queens today, and in particular some things that can be done about the issues in Queens and some bills we've been working on in the last season, I suppose, with relation to these issues. So just some important context right off the bat here. I know as somebody who's not from the New York area that it's kind of a confusing situation to try to dive into, but it's important that we get some direct context for the communities we're talking about in New York. Queens is a county of 2.4 million people. That's more than a dozen states. So we can't just say Queens, we should really be talking about the specific area we're looking at. We're looking at an area of South Queens here in yellow. You can see on the map to the right. That's the neighborhoods of Jamaica, Ozone Park, and Rochdale, and mostly those neighborhoods. There are some other smaller ones in there as well. That's around the JFK airport. That's near Fire Island. It's near Nassau County, etc. And it's just, it's a really highly populated, dense community. It's a low-income community. It's, of course, it was originally pre-1950s, a white immigrant, white working class community. And over time, it has since become a far more diverse community, racially speaking. Black, Latino, and Asian American residents abound in the area. And today, it's one of the most diverse parts of one of the most diverse cities in the world. Yeah, there you go. As you can see, if you saw it fade, that yellow portion is that blue color. And if you've ever seen one of these maps before, I believe it's the New York Times or the Washington Post, I can't remember exactly which, put together these maps years ago to visualize the racial makeup of American cities. And as you can see, those blue dots are Black residents, the green ones are Hispanic, and the orange are Asian. And in this community where this water issue has come up, those three race groups are quite prominent. About 100 years ago, or 120 some now, Queens was supplied by the Jamaica Water Supply Company, and it got its water directly from the ground. And some 100 years later, that water system closed. Yes, in 1996, the city of New York was consolidating its water system and decided to buy out the Jamaica Water Supply Company and connect those homes that had previously been on that system to the New York City system, which was a financial decision. It just made more sense monetarily that would be the case. They were able to offer lower rates to residents than Jamaica Water Supply. And in fact, Jamaica Water Supply still exists across the border in Nassau County. But as part of the merger, some 69 wells in Queens were closed. New York City gets all of its water from upstate sources. It pipes it in along the Hudson River. It's not from the Hudson River, but that's how the pipes come into the city. And there's no need for groundwater wells. So some 69 wells were closed, and 60 million gallons of water per day after this change was not coming out of the ground. Of course, that water's got to go somewhere, and it was underground, so it just sat there. Over 10 years after the wells closed, the New York City Department of Environmental Preservation found that the water table underneath Queens had raised a whole 35 feet. That is absolutely crazy. As you can see here, the map on the left is a 2013 study by the United States Geologic Service. In North Queens, neighborhoods like Jackson Heights and Flushing, you'll see that the water table is usually somewhere around like 50 to 100 feet below the ground. In Jamaica, in South Queens, it is sometimes as shallow as 10 feet underground, which is absolutely incredibly shallow. Think of the fact that the subway runs through here. That's underground. Think of the fact that basements through here are less than 10 feet under, or sometimes a little more than 10 feet underground, actually. So the water table sitting higher than these underground infrastructures is a really bad situation. Of course, it's becoming even worse as time goes on. You'll probably recall the handful of hurricanes and things that have hit, terrible storms that have hit New York in the past few years. And that's, of course, part of a broader trend of climate change, that we're seeing more intense storms come further north, and that's affecting the urban environment in New York, and especially so in South Queens because of this high water table. When it rains, New York is, of course, all impervious surface. It's all asphalt, it's all buildings. It's nothing the water can really soak through. So they were just piping stormwater into the ground. But now that the water table has risen, there's nowhere for that water to go. So those stormwater channels that would normally take the water out to sea are flooded with just regular groundwater now. There's nowhere for the water to go. The streets are flooding, basements are flooding, homes are flooding, businesses are flooding, and most of them don't have the means, the resources, the income to stop this from happening. Of course, institutions that can, like the subway and like York College, which is in the neighborhood, have installed sump pumps that pump the water out of their groundwater and into anywhere else. Unfortunately, obviously, most people just don't have the resources to get that kind of thing done themselves. These pumps and the installations can be thousands and thousands of dollars. And because it's thousands and thousands of dollars per house, per business, per building, it's not a feasible solution to just expect everybody to someday find their own way to pump this water out. I suppose it's a possible solution, but it would be incredibly expensive, and it's really just not in the interest of the people of Queens to go through these kinds of reconstructions. To reduce the flooding, they need to actually address the source of the problem, which is the high water table. And the only way to do that, to bring down the water table, is to reopen the wells like they were before. So of course, some people in New York have noticed this. Quite a few people in New York have noticed this. And in fact, the city is one of them. The city has taken preliminary steps in the last decade or so. They've offered projects, they've bid for projects that they were gonna have some of these wells reopened, but they always stop at last minute. Wells were supposed to reopen in 2018 and not one has reopened yet. Senator James Sanders, a Democrat from South Queens, has a solution to this quagmire problem. For about the last 6 or 8 years, he's offered a bill. This session, it's called S1567, that would require the city to study and plan on how to reopen these wells. It's a really simple bill. It's only about a page long. And the whole idea is the city knows what needs to happen. The city knows these wells need to be reopened and they're just dragging their feet. This bill requires them to study it. It requires them to put in a plan. It actually doesn't even require them to implement it. But once you have a plan, getting the ball rolling is a lot easier. It's been clear to at least Senator Sanders and everybody we talked to this season that it's really just the fact that New York didn't want to do this before. It's expensive. It's going to require effort. It's going to require time. It's going to require admitting that the city made a mistake some about 25 years ago now. That's hard for politicians to do. It's hard for city departments to admit that they made these mistakes, and this bill would force them to do that. They have traditionally opposed it, and although it looks like we may be turning the corner on that point, it hasn't happened yet. So there's hope out there, but this is the kind of solution we need, just something that requires the city to do what they need to do and quit the negligence. Another wrinkle in this whole situation, and another reason the city of New York really should get its act together, is that the water under Queens is contaminated. And the city of New York received a huge settlement to fix that. Over the last few decades, there was an additive that got put in gasoline. I believe it was an additive that reduced carbon emissions in gasoline. It's called MTBE. And there was an ExxonMobil gasoline refinery in Brooklyn, just not upstream. There's not really streams in New York, but you get the idea here, that was leaking MTBE into the ground for quite some time. And although MTBE is not known to be carcinogenic in the kind of concentrations you'll find in New York, it is at high concentrations. And the bigger problem here is truly that it's foul smelling, and it can't be drunk. It tastes terrible. If the water coming out of your tap tasted like horseradish, you wouldn't drink it. The same goes for this MTBE. The city won a settlement through quite a long process, starting in the early 2000s, finally ending in 2014, to get that water cleaned up with a $105 million settlement. They've yet to start that at all. There's no water treatment facility. And of course, for a water treatment facility, you'd have to pump the water out of the ground to start with. And as we know, no wells have reopened. So until this fairly long-term solution, water filtration and pumping, can get started, A, they need to plan for it. That's what S1567 does. And B, they need to actually start pumping the water so they can filter it out, clean it, and get it into homes again. The other solution here, and they're more short-term, they're smaller, but these little urban things we can do within our urban fabric to change how stormwater is managed in places like South Queens. As you can see here on the right, we've got just a really simple sidewalk rain garden. Lots of these have been installed in New York over the last few years. They're really popular in urban planning nowadays, just as an easy solution to filter and store stormwater in places with high water tables. This is a great strategy. It's easy to implement. It takes, it's fairly inexpensive in comparison to broader solutions. This is not an end solution. It's very much a short-term solution. In a hurricane, a stormwater garden is not going to do all that much. But in a regular 1-inch rainfall, which right now does cause flooding in New York City, this can make the difference. This can save homes and businesses. So this is a really excellent strategy that New York City can implement in the meantime to make this situation a little bit better.
All right, and then we have the other side of the coin, rural situation. So this is a story of Martin County, Kentucky, which is really a story of failed infrastructure and water contamination. So Martin County, Kentucky has been facing one of the worst water crises in the entire country for over 20 years now. It's due to a coal slurry that I'll get into more in a minute. This is also part of the reason that Martin County is still facing this crisis because of the loss of jobs due to failing industry, which leads to lower tax revenue. Toxic water comes out of every Martin County faucet because of this coal slurry spill. It doesn't matter where it is or what it is, the bathtub, the shower, the sink. It's all toxic water. Lead pipes and other infrastructure failures also pose a problem to the health of Martin County residents. Obviously, you don't want to be drinking water that's coming out of lead pipes and is delivered to you in lead pipes. Not like they can drink it anyway, since it's already toxic, unfortunately. Residents are forced to pay outrageous water utility bills for this water that they're not even able to use, on top of it already being poisonous. So the source of the problem, on October 11th, 2000, a coal slurry storage pit failed and released 306 million cubic gallons of toxic waste into the waterways and groundwater of Martin County, Kentucky. Massey Energy, which owned and operated the coal slurry storage pit, they built it on top of abandoned mine shafts. The coal slurry overflowed from the mouth of the mine once it failed because the mine shaft wasn't deep enough and big enough to hold all the water, and went out into Martin County's rivers and groundwater. Despite this, ruining the waterways and all sources of water in the county, the residents are still forced to pay extractive water bills, or they will be evicted if they don't pay the water bills. Infrastructure is also woefully outdated and in desperate need of replacement and maintenance, which is really hard to do in a place like Martin County, which is in the hills of Appalachia. Resources are stretched very thin. Like I was talking about earlier, the loss of jobs from the coal industry has really taken a damper to the amount of tax revenue that Martin County has been able to bring in over the past 20 or so years. This has been happening and been an ongoing problem for 20 years now. I really want to emphasize this point just because we hear so much about disasters of environmental nature in other parts of the country, especially Flint, Michigan. And everybody really knows about Flint, Michigan, but not a lot of people know about Martin County. And this has been happening longer than Flint, Michigan. It's not a competition, but this has been, this is our fourth president and our fifth Kentucky governor. This has happened under, and it still hasn't changed. So I think one of the main problems is many Martin County residents just feel like they're abandoned and invisible, and it just leads to an untenable situation where you can't get clean water and you don't see any hope of it ever changing. And, they have to spend so much money on these water utility bills, but they also have to buy bottled water for a lot of the year because the Massey Energy water station that was installed is far away and it doesn't always work. This is really a problem caused by Massey Energy that they have really done little to remediate, and the consequences of it are still being felt every day. However, there are some things that could bring this problem to a better area and an area where things can be done to permanently solve these water infrastructure issues within all of Appalachia, not just Martin County, at least in the Kentucky sector of it. So legislation focusing on the environmental disaster and water infrastructure must be passed in Kentucky legislature. The good news is that there's already bipartisan bills that have been proposed to do just this. Since Senate Concurrent Resolution 64 seeks to reestablish the Public Water and Wastewater System Infrastructure Task Force, which will establish a committee focused on providing solutions to Kentucky's water struggles. Now, this sounds like a basic thing, but when you don't have this, it's really important. What this committee would do would be a body that's made up of experts on these issues, and they would be required to do research and come up with legislative policy and scientific and social solutions for these water issues and infrastructure problems, and would be required to present a report to the Kentucky Senate before the end of the session. Unfortunately, this bill died in session last year. However, we at WICC are working very hard to bring it back and have it reintroduced and passed in order to get this road recovery started for Martin County. And I really just want to emphasize that more public pressure is needed on this. Like I was saying before, everybody knows about Flint, but not everybody knows about Martin County. And these people deserve to have their voices heard. It's been 20 years and it's 20 years too long.
All right, thanks, Jackson. Thanks, Colin. You guys provided us with some really great information tonight. Again, I don't know if I introduced myself earlier. My name is Ariana Trapp. I am the advocacy team coordinator at WICC. And so now we're just going to get into some questions. We're going to do some discussion. And if anyone in the audience has any questions, you all can put those in the chat and we will get to them when we have a chance. So the first question is, could both of these regions benefit from a singular federal solution, and what would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I can start with this. I was thinking about this earlier, and I was thinking that, these are two very different areas of the country. The one thing that I think could help is the infrastructure bill. It has funds allocated for water resources. However, I'm skeptical just because of the history of the area and because it's just so often overlooked. I don't have the most confidence in the world that this federal solution is going to be able to directly target what really needs to be done and pinpoint these problems. I think a federal solution is a good start for bringing attention to this issue, but I really think that the real changes can come at state level and legislative levels within the state, and really focusing on the exact needs of the people in the county, in Martin County.
Yeah, I'll kind of echo what Colin said, that although I think these issues are connected, they kind of come from different sources. The problem comes from different sources. They're both negligence, right? But but you look at Martin County, and ultimately it's really a money problem here. That the coal company stored things improperly, and that's negligent. But we have rules to prevent those things. There's nothing legislatively we can do there. It's about getting the money and solving the problem that way. And then in New York, they have the money. The money is in hand. They've got $100 million to start filtering and pumping water, and they're not using it. So, and that's more a question of negligence than anything else. I think the thing that really relates to these issues is that we don't in this country have a sense of infrastructure you might have a right to, that maybe you have a right to water, you have a right to adequate stormwater protection, you have a right to, certain modern amenities that we don't think of as, like, if you live in a nice safe community, you really might not think about, whether or not the stormwater is working right. I know in my town, I don't have to. I feel like the best thing the federal government could do is come out and establish a list of infrastructure rights, things like access to water, adequate stormwater systems, et cetera, things like that. Establishing those rights would actually obligate governments and companies to treat people with respect, and obligate those governments and companies to allocate resources to these problems.
Okay, great. So our next question is, how do we prevent problems related to water infrastructure in both rural and urban communities moving forward?
I think it's mostly a question to me of planning ahead. The biggest thing that came up time and time again when I've been reading and I've been working on Bill S1567 is, how were they allowed to do this in the first place? How did they not make the connection that if we stop pumping 60 million gallons of water a day, the water table is going to rise? It just seems so obvious and so, like, straightforward that they just didn't think of it. It never crossed their minds that could be a problem. I think it's really about studying and planning ahead. That at least in New York, where the infrastructure already existed, it was about thinking forward, thinking ahead, and realizing that every decision in a metropolitan system has consequences. That if you've got a subway underground, you probably need the water table to be sufficiently low for that to run. If you've got stormwater sewers that don't actually you can't have holding ponds for stormwater in big cities because there's buildings everywhere in a very dense city. well, then you need a place for the water to go, and that's got to be underground. So it's just very clear that it wasn't planned, it wasn't thought forward. And if you really want to prevent these kinds of problems from cropping up in the future, we need to make sure we study and we think thoroughly about how we work on and work around our water and stormwater infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo a lot of what Jackson said there. I would say, I mean, in particular for this one, I think there's many different layers of what could have been done for this not to happen. I think the first and most shockingly obvious one is don't build a coal slurry storage pit on top of an abandoned mine shaft. I know that sounds kind of obvious, but clearly it wasn't. I think, you know, not just trusting that things are going to go perfectly 100% of the time and that you're never going to run into any issues, and then you know, building your systems in such a way to not afford any points of failure is, I think, an extremely damaging method of constructing infrastructure, especially infrastructure that is preventative, like the coal slurry storage pit, which was preventing that stuff from getting in the environment. Those kinds of things need to have fail safes in them. You know, stuff like that. You know, a nuclear power plant doesn't have one off button or one safety measure. Neither should something like this. Neither should anything for that matter, especially when it comes to do with water infrastructure, because it's so critical. And I'd say for rural areas, it's a lot of surveying needs to be done, finding where pipes are kept and where they are, well, the routes that they run, potentially better routes, because a place like Appalachia, where Martin County is located, it is extremely rugged and rough terrain, very hilly, and some of the most foreboding terrain in the country, especially for infrastructure projects.
All right, and then the last question that we have, and then we'll, if any participants would like to ask any questions to Colin or Jackson, you all feel free to ask them out loud after this question, or just drop them in the chat and I will read them off. But our last question that we have is, are there any challenges you view as unique to either strictly rural or strictly urban communities?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, kind of building off what I was saying earlier, definitely specifically Martin County is Appalachia. I was talking to my fellow team members earlier. It's really hard to understate how important geography is in this situation because of the way that infrastructure, especially water pipes, have to be laid. Gravity is very important, obviously, as water flows downhill and has to be pumped uphill, and pumping takes energy, and energy requires power, requires coal, and coal requires infrastructure, and so on and so on and so on. So I'd say unique challenge is really areas that don't have a lot of economic output, such as Martin County, gaining the recognition and notice and power to actually get funds for a project that is going to be frankly very expensive to undertake. It's kind of a lot of public pressure, I would say, for rural communities, because they don't always bring an obvious benefit to political strategy for somebody who's running for office when it's only about 11,000 votes. Even for that county, you don't need to carry that county to win the region. So I'd say for rural counties, it's really making sure that people in the city stick up for them, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, and I'll take a different angle on things, and I kind of mentioned it when I was discussing the last question, that a big factor here is the interaction of urban systems. That when you've got dense communities, you've got multiple opportunities to screw something up, to make a mistake you didn't intend to make, and for these problems to cascade until you created a real disaster. I am 100% positive that that things like this, just they needed to study it before they did it, and they need to study it now. They need to know what they need to know the mistakes they made and know how they can undo them. I doubt they need to reopen all 69 wells, but they don't know that, and neither do I. I doubt they need to, I don't know what kind of water filtration system they need, but I don't think they do either because they haven't studied it, nor have they spent the money they won in court over 10 years ago now. I really can't stress enough that like these things are very complicated, and particularly in an urban setting where just nodes of interest are so much more dense, and you've got, just practically, physically speaking, under a single road, you've got wastewater, stormwater, you've got subway, you've got water, you've got electricity, you've got fiber internet, you've got all kinds of different things, and the interactions between those things is very difficult. As a point of comparison, I imagine if you shut off a well in Martin County, Kentucky, it would probably have a very different effect than it would have in a place of much dense York. The problem that they created there is not one of money or attention. It's a problem of negligence and lack of, just really a crass lack of thought, that they didn't look ahead into the future and wonder what could happen after a decision they made. So yeah, that's what makes these two situations distinct. But again, they both go back to water infrastructure. And yeah.
All right. I think that wraps it up. So if there's any questions, we can take those now. Say thank you to Jackson and Colin and Ariana and Annabelle for putting this together. But Jackson and Colin, really thank you for all the hard work. And my last thing I wanted to add before we go was you guys both mentioned pieces of legislation. So if anybody listening is curious about those pieces of legislation, where would they look for more information?
You can go to yeswic.com and find more information about both those bills under the respective sections for New York and Kentucky. It would be one place to find more information.
Yeah, I'll speak specifically to New York. The state legislature in New York is just a great website. You can actually go onto the legislature's website right now, and you can click "I support this bill." That's S1567. I won't be too specific in my advocacy just so we avoid conflict of interest and whatnot. But that website is a really fantastic resource if you're curious about any and all bills. I really was impressed with the quality there. I've I've struggled in the past with state legislature websites, but New York is not one of those states, so I have to direct you there.
Unfortunately, Kentucky is one of those states. You can download a PDF of the bill, but unless you can read legalese, it's going to be tough. I would really say that, the basics of the bill are really have people who know what they're doing, look at the problem and present solutions is the gist of the bill. But you can, of course, go to the Kentucky Legislative website and read through the full text of the bill, and it should give you a better understanding of what's going on in there.
All right. Any last words from Annabelle, Ari, or Jackson or Colin?
Annabelle put it in the chat, but I just wanted to reiterate that WICC does have a newsletter, and you can sign up for it. It's just an email that we send out periodically. And so the link to that is in the chat, as well as the link to donate to WICC. So any donations to WICC are tax deductible. Obviously not for the taxes you're about to file if you haven't filed yours yet, but for next year. So any donations are very much appreciated. They all go towards our initiatives at WICC for different scholarships or different advocacy projects that we do throughout the year. So just wanted to point that out.
Thanks, Ari. And yeah, just thanks to everyone in the audience. It's really nice to have you all here. It's great for Colin and Jackson to get to talk about the work that they've done. And obviously, these are really important issues, so we really appreciate it. And have a good rest of your night.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
We appreciate your time.
Bye, everyone.